In this last video, those of you that are my students have already read the Pizza Hut and Yum! Brands case, as they kind of had their split off with PepsiCo. So a lot of this is going to be very, very familiar with you. But here's some steps for creating a cultural change. The first thing is creating a sense of urgency. Now this can be a real emergency, like there's been a natural disaster, people are dying. That's more of like the Jack in the Box case that my students have already been following. So when you're dealing with a loss of life, limb, or eyesight, that's a real emergency, and so that's going to necessitate change. But you can also create a sense of emergency, and that's what I call prosaic emergency. A prosaic emergency, much like prosaic entrepreneurship, looks at a damage to routines. It's a communicated crisis. Think about this. I go up to somebody at work, I'm like, hey, you do this, da-da-da-da. They'll be resentful. Versus, hey, you know how crazy our boss is? You know how angry he gets? If we don't get this done, he's just going to absolutely lose it. Do you think you could help me? Yeah, of course. I don't want him to lose it either. And so we kind of work together. Is it really that big of a deal that the boss yells, screams, even if he fires you, quite frankly, that's not a real emergency. But you make it seem like an emergency, and that same mobilizing effect occurs. Then you got to change the key players and key leadership sometimes. And you think about it all the time in the news. Don't you know when you read the news and it's like, well, X, Y, and Z company didn't do very well, so they fired the CEO and some of the senior leadership? Well, because leaders have to be held accountable. So the idea is that by changing key leaders and key players, you can change the culture. You're cutting the head off the snake and putting a new head on there, so to speak. So sometimes you got to change the culture. It means changing the leaders and the culture that they have. Role modeling. It's one thing to tell people to do something differently, but if you actually want to change the culture, you need to live the culture and you need to live the change that you wish to see in your employees. So you as leaders, you as managers need to change your behaviors first and allow your subordinates to follow you. More training. Right? And of course we saw that with Yum, especially, right? Not only was it the role modeling, but also they retrained managers. They trained them to think and act differently. And you as leaders can also train your employees to embody the culture that you wish to see. Changing the reward system. Again, that kind of goes hand in hand with training. Reward the behaviors that you'd like to see, punish or discourage the ones that you don't. And then finally, you need to create new symbols and stories. Again, you saw this in the Pizza Hut PepsiCo case, where new stories were created, new expressions of culture were created, and new values were manifested. And of course, new symbols that went along, and these new symbols embodied new cultural values. So this is actually how you change it in culture. So I hope you've enjoyed this entire playlist, and you know a lot about culture now. Okay? You've seen how culture is a huge part of leadership and a huge part of management. You've seen how these models and ontologies can conflict and what we need to do about that. You've seen how culture is important for job interviewing, and it's important to help you become a better manager, both internally, introspectively, and how to help your employees underneath you become better people. Great, as always, hit that thumbs up, that's the like button, hit the subscribe and the bell, and definitely post your comments down below. Looking forward to seeing you in the next playlist.